Welcome back to the Suicide Prevention Show on 1360 WLBK. We have the honor of speaking with Ilona Meagher today. She's the author of Moving a Nation to Care, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and America's Returning Troops. And the statistics are staggering about this disorder, and not only the nature of the disorder itself is just horrendous. Ilona, tell us a little bit about the stats and how can our listeners identify whether or not a loved one has PTSD?
Sure, there's so much. So let's see here. Let's rattle off one here, a recent one. The VA reported an 87% jump in PTSD treatment, the cases from September 2005 to June 2006. Wow. So just in that period, you know, this is again, I'm sure, connected with the multiple deployments that we were talking about previously.
You're talking in a little over a year, an 87%
jump.
And so they actually have almost doubled in that period of time.
Yeah.
And before we were talking earlier on the show about not having enough funds to be able to treat these soldiers that are coming back with this terrible experience.
Yeah, that's why, you know, that's why we need to talk about these issues, and we need to get people a little bit aware, because it might light a fire under people. I think it will. I think it will light a fire under a lot of Americans' bellies. I think the Washington Post reporting earlier this year on Walter Reed, I kind of joke and say that kind of scooped my book, but I'm glad that it did, because that's what we needed. A lot of people came together on that and started pushing. And so, for example, Representative Bob Filner, who's the VA House Chairman, you know, of the Veterans Affairs Committee, not the VA, sorry, but, you know, just the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House, he really wants to move things. Push it out of the envelope. Let's stop studying it. We know what we need to do, and we need to, you know, make sure the resources are there. For example, here's another statistic. The suicides in Iraq that are taking place are about 3% of the death total.
Wow.
Wow.
So I just recently
saw. That's one you don't hear.
Yeah, I just recently saw that one. And also, you know, the whole point of our having a Veterans Administration, when I started doing my research for this book, and again, being a novice, I had to start at the beginning, I had to look at, well, why did they even create a VA? Well, we created it. Society created it, and the reason why we created it is because we didn't want veterans to have to go and serve the country for 2 years, 3 years, however long their deployments are, and have to return and actually be behind the civilian population. So the whole point of the VA is to try as much as possible to give the returning troops the support so that they didn't lose any time. You know, they've already lost time because they're not at home. They're not you know, getting their 3-year promotions at work. You know, many of the Guard and Reserve, they have businesses that are going under because they're deployed so long. So there are a lot of things going on here, and the Veterans Administration is supposed to be that safety blanket that says society wants to make sure that you're not left behind, that you are going to have the same benefits as people who stayed here in the comfort of their homes, making love with their wives, you know, eating great food, you know, getting sleep at night and doing all those things. So that's the reason why we have the VA, and that's why we need to make sure the resources are there. You'd ask Citizen Mike, so if you're a family member and you have a troop that's coming back, what should you be looking for? And I'm not a doctor, but everything that I looked at says there are basically 3 different things, clusters of behaviors that you need to look for that will kind of point towards if your loved one has PTSD. The first one is called intrusive, and that means that you're re-experiencing the trauma, and we've all heard about the flashbacks. Veterans might have nightmares. They might have, you know, feel anxious, like something's just kind of always looming. It's always there. They can't get it out of their mind. That's the first part of it. The second cluster is called avoidant, and that means emotional numbing or drawing inward. You know, they don't want to think about their experience, so they just push it down. I think a lot of the World War II generation did that. And they're now finding re-triggers. You know, it's starting to get re-triggered again, and it's coming back up again. They also, this avoidant also means avoiding your family, avoiding other people, locking themselves up. Their world gets really, really small. And then the third part is this hyperarousal that we've heard a lot about too, aggressive driving, being hyper vigilant, being always alert, if somebody drops some books and you jump real fast. And the whole thing with all of these things is they all kind of work in this horrible way of making the soldier feel as though they're losing control over their emotions, over their experiences, over their life. And if we know anything about soldiers, these are rock and roll people. They're used to being in control. They've done great work, and it's really difficult for them to deal with that.
And it is, and you say they're kind of like losing control, and they don't want that because they've been taught their whole military career they have to remain in control. You don't get excited. You don't lose your composure under difficult situations. You have to maintain your poise, your position, etc. And here they are not being able to do that and not understanding it. And,
the other thing I'm getting from your book is the fact that they do that so well prevents them from accessing the resources that they need to deal with the nightmares, the night sweats, and the startling response, and these very violent remembrances of the environment that they were in. Ilona, tell us about what are the resources that soldiers and their loved ones can use and can access. What can our listeners do to help change this situation?
That's a great question, and I am so glad to say there are a lot of resources. So, yes, the troop veteran can go to the VA. But, we've all heard about the stigma. Maybe they can't, they worry. I've heard a lot from, for example, Special Forces troops. They worry. They don't want to miss out on that next mission. We've all heard about the data lapses, right? Where veterans' records get exposed. So they worry about that. So if you don't want to do that, you can always go to the Vet Center, which is a little bit of a lot less medically based. You'll be able to talk with other veterans there. If you totally want to go out of the system, the military system, there are 2 organizations that provide free counseling services, not only to troops, but the caregivers, the family members also need support. And those are, just again, Google these, Operation Comfort or Give an Hour. There are databases set up online, and you can type in your zip code, your state, and you'll be able to find psychologists and counselors in your area who will give free counseling for an hour for you, for veterans, for your family members. Then there are also all types of other resources online. I do have quite a few on my blog at PTSD Combat. There's a whole, click on my link that says resources, and you'll go to a whole bunch of other links. Lots of different groups offering in different areas. Here in Illinois, I don't know of one specifically, but I'm sure if you just even Google in, DeKalb PTSD resources, you'll probably bring something up.
And Ilona, if we could again, if we could talk about the symptoms we need to watch for with those people.
Yes. Well, there are a lot of things. Obviously, if somebody's, number one, if you're avoiding, the problem with that is the research shows, and this is the reason why we also need to have the counselors in place. This is why we need to have the funding in place to support. If early on, if you get in early and allow that veteran to learn positive coping mechanisms, they will have a higher likelihood of being able to deal with their PTSD. So, for example, if they come back and they're too afraid to go get help, and instead they choose to self-medicate. Many veterans will drink, or they'll use marijuana or other types of drugs to, again, just not, just drive it down, push it down. How much harder is it now to break that bad habit than if automatically when they return, you're proactive, there's a proactive outreach program to make sure that they learn how to cope with those stresses of feeling out of control. There's actually biological in our brain, they're called neural grooves. And this is what I learned, that if you put down habits, that neural groove goes in the same direction. If you put down a positive coping mechanism, the more you practice that positive habit, your brain will support it even more so. But if you put down a negative coping mechanism like self-medication or anger, yelling at your wife or whatever that is, you're going to continue to have that reinforced even biologically in your brain through these neural grooves. So proactive.
One of the other things I noticed in your book about that is the changes in technology have contributed to some extent to the problems that we're experiencing here. It used to be that it took months for a soldier to come back home as they're taking the train or they're going over by boat or that sort of thing. And in that period of time, it gave them an opportunity to shift from an environment that laid these grooves down about self-preservation, real self-preservation, or I die, or my buddies die, and coming back to civilian life. And today, they don't have that type of option. They want to be reunited with their families, so they do what they have to do to get out of the zone as quickly as possible, be reunited with their families, and it's basically, I go to sleep one night, I wake up the next night, I'm back home, and I haven't had a chance to have these grooves
way to decompress and stuff, you know. Another thing I wanted to hit on just quickly, too, if I could, is, you know, we're talking, this whole show is about suicide. Your book is about the suicide issues from our troops returning. The other side of that suicide coin is in Iraq, the suicide bombers that we have there, they're heroes in the eyes of their savior, you know, and so here they're doing something which makes them the hero, and it's just the opposite for us.
Interesting. Right. That's a real interesting point, Chuck. I also think that it does affect a person's psyche if that suicide bomber is a young child, or in order for them to protect themselves, if they have a young child who gets in the way of their convoy. You know, we know now that they have to keep going. And so it is interesting how yes, our cultures are different, but as far as it affecting your psyche, it doesn't matter right or wrong. I think it's difficult. If you're a decent person, it's difficult to have to kill and see children get killed.
Absolutely, and we are quickly running out of time. On that point, though, you know, oftentimes we hear of our soldiers paying the ultimate cost when they lose their lives in battle. And in reading these accounts, it occurred to me that those that have completed suicide paid the ultimate cost because they came back home with the battle scars and the memories of what they experienced there. And they experienced that torture so much that their only choice was to leave this world.
And unfortunately, they're really kind of forgotten because they're not placed on, they won't be on any memorial wall.
This is true.
This is why we need these stories, so that these families who've lost these heroes, so that their pain is validated, so they know that we care, that we're talking about this issue.
Fabulous. I'm glad we could have this conversation. Tamara, is there anything that you'd like to add before we sign off?
I wanted to share, I was at a Lions football game yesterday in Detroit, Michigan, and they, during one of the TV breaks, brought forward a young man who had just returned from Iraq. He was a double amputee, and they gave him a Purple Heart, which was wonderful, and the applause for him was amazing. And what I noticed, however, though this was a fine tribute to him, but it was, you know, breaks over, cut back to the game. He was wheeled off the field, and no one recognizes that this young man probably takes 3 hours every morning to get out of bed, that everything he does is difficult, and that he is carrying with him a history of having served and been highly functional, and now is left with this life and how to go forward from here, and that we have in our minds a picture or a non-picture of what the war in Iraq is like. And I think that educating ourselves, paying more attention, getting involved, being active, and really standing up for these individuals help them stand up. and make a difference.
Very well said. You're listening to the Suicide Prevention Show, where we've had the honor to speak with Ilona Meagher, author of Moving a Nation to Care. If you'd like to listen to this show or other shows, or like to find out how to join her blog or be able to get more information, go to 1360WLBK.com, click on the Stop Suicide button, and you'll be taken to a page where you'll have those options. Thank you for joining us. That's the Suicide Prevention Show for today.